You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lipp, and a marketing manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I am joined by Nathan Whittacre, CEO at Stimulus Technologies. And today we're going to be talking about how you can get your business digitally ready, digital readiness. Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Sherry, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining.
So when we're talking about digital readiness in a business, what do business owners need to know about that topic, that subject?
Well, I think a big deal for businesses today is certainly how well positioned they are to utilize new technologies inside their business. And, we often talk about like this acceptance curve of technology, whether it's individually or as business owners. So, there's obviously very early adopters, people that are bleeding edge, they're doing things inside their businesses or whatever it may be before anybody else. And then, and those are very few. And then you have these, this curve of, as the new technology gets progressively better, more and more acceptance, and you have early acceptors, and then the general population accepting it, and then you have the laggards that only after 90% of the people are using that technology will they implement it. And I think because the technology is moving so fast today, the timeline on that bell curve is really getting shrunk down. It might have been 50 years ago. It might have been years before technology became ubiquitous among businesses. Now today, digital readiness might mean that within days or months, your competitors are implementing technologies that are making them better than you. And unless you're implementing those quickly also, you may be left behind in the marketplace. So when we talk about digital readiness, it's basically you as the owner and your company. Are you ready to implement new technologies and new strategies inside your business to improve your company and in the end, improve your bottom line? You have to, whatever you implement inside your company, it has to drive new revenue and profitability inside your company. So just means being ready for anything, as Sherry and I were just talking before we started the podcast about AI and what it's meaning to the business today and how, we as a company are trying to implement and integrate it. There's a lot of companies out there that aren't even looking at it, but it's the biggest change right now and it's moving so fast. And so the question is you as a company, are you ready to implement these strategies? Or are you going to wait for somebody else to implement it and then start taking your customers because they have this new technology that's making their business more productive and profitable?
And so that you've talked about this before, there's different types of business owners. If somebody is, some people are all about new technology and some people are kind of resistant, especially if you hear the words AI. In fact, I went to a conference last night that Magic Johnson was speaking at, and he was talking about his businesses, and he's like, I hate all that stuff, but I have people on my team who do it. And so how do you recommend somebody start taking that assessment if they're not so digitally inclined?
I think you just made the right point is, depending on where you're at as a business owner and your comfort for adopting new technologies, you need to have people on your team that are in a scale of adoption. So it's really being digital readiness, being digitally ready, or the digital readiness that we're talking about is your overarching organization. So if you're a laggard, if you got to wait for everybody to get it and you're still running a flip phone today, you need to make sure that you have people on your team that are identifying these new technologies and working towards implementing those. So, but you as a business owner need to set the tone of saying, okay, we as a company are going to be either some type of early adopter or early mass adopters so that we're getting ahead of these technologies before our competitors do. And so you as the leader of the organization set that tone, and then also make sure that your team has the skills and the abilities and the desire to implement those technologies. You might not have to. You might be the one being shown how to do it, but you have to be ready and have the culture inside your organization to want to deploy those. You mentioned Magic Johnson. It's obviously he's older. Been around for a long time. And we often think that, an older generation will struggle with some of these new technologies. But on the opposite side of it, I had a speaker to my CEO group that came in this week. He's 82 years old, still speaking, which is amazing, lots of energy. And he's talking about sales and marketing and how to implement better sales and marketing tools. And more than half his presentation was about AI tools. And, him in his 80s, knew these tools well, was talking about him and his companies, how they're implementing them and using them. So it's not about age. It's really about your desire and culture to implement these things. So, whether you're doing it yourself or having team members do it, businesses need to be ready for these major changes and major shifts. And I tell you, AI is the big one that's happening right now. And organizations need to look at automation and generative AI and how to improve their companies through that, because it's so important to do today.
Yeah, and definitely we have a couple podcasts of people, because I just ran into somebody and they're just like, I hate AI, but I think they're just thinking of it as generating fake stuff, whereas it's like instead of as a business tool. And so what kind of things do you think people could do to educate themselves about that? Obviously, we have some podcasts. We have several podcasts about that now.
So there's a lot of different things. One, I always recommend people to try it out. There are tools out there that incorporate AI that are standard business tools that are very interesting. Like, for example, the sales and marketing person introduced me to one that I hadn't heard of before called Crystal Knows. And it's a prospecting tool that when you log into LinkedIn, it analyzes the LinkedIn profile of the person and gives you an idea of the personality profile of that individual. So when you're selling to that individual, you know what type of personality they are, so that you can make your communication and marketing align with how that person is going to receive it. If you go to any sales and marketing training for the last 50 years, that's the stuff that they teach you. But they were teaching you how to recognize that, or the way that people communicate, the way people, write their emails or talk on the phone. The salesperson would have had to analyze that and, come up with a conclusion so they know how to sell with it. Now there's tools out there that will do a quick analysis, whether it's an email or LinkedIn profile, and say this person is a driver or this person is an investigator, whatever it may be. And that now you can develop the right communication style with them, send the right emails, make the right marketing for them to make better buying decisions. And, these are, again, it's just stuff that we've been doing in business for many years. We're just automating the process with AI. Certainly the deep fake stuff that you just mentioned is scary. And I think that's what people worry about, is like, oh my goodness, it's going to, take an image of me and I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that I would never say on the internet and generate videos that I would have never produced. And how do I trust anything anymore? And yeah, certainly people are going to take advantage of this technology to do harm. We've had podcasts on how hackers are using it now. But I think as companies today, we have to evolve and change, else we are going to be left behind. If a salesperson that isn't using that tool is up against a salesperson that using that tool, like that, for example, they're going to be more productive and more effective as a salesperson. That's really what it is. It's just increasing the effectiveness of our individual team members and giving them the tools to be as productive in the environment as possible.
Yeah, and then what other key components to digital readiness should people be thinking about if they're doing a digital readiness assessment of their own business?
So I think that there's 5 areas in digital readiness, and the first area is what I talked about: is developing a culture of technology innovation, is making sure that your organization understands that technology is going to drive the company forward in this age. You can't just, plug your ears and ignore all that's going around and on in the world today. So that's the first one. And as leaders, that's our goal. As a CEO of an organization, we set the vision. We have to say to the organization, we're going to be an adopter of the technology. We're going to do our best to incorporate those. So, key number one, you as a leader, create the culture. Then you have to understand what your current infrastructure is. Do an assessment of your hardware, your software, your network, all the things that are inside your organization to make sure that you're keeping up with this latest generation of tools that are becoming available. Do you have the infrastructure to even implement these things? And that's where stimulus can help you out, is understanding, if you are ready to implement things like AI on your network and incorporating these tools into your system. Then we've already talked a lot about digital skills. Make sure that your workforce and your employees understand what's available. All these are new. Nobody really knows how to use these tools because they just came out in the last 6 months. So you're not going to hire. Maybe you can. Maybe you can hire an employee that's already skilled, but they're probably not experts on it. And so it's sending your team out for the right training to develop those skills to be able to implement it. There's a lot of data that you're going to collect. So data management is a big part of it. And when we had our AI expert on a couple of months ago on the podcast, we talked a lot about data scientists, and the collection of data is a big part of AI. So for AI to work, generative AI, we're talking about things like ChatGPT and some of these tools, they need a large amount of data to be useful inside your organization. So organizing that data, feeding it into the AI system. So, if you want a chat bot on your website to answer inquiries from, customers, they need to know how you've interacted in the past with customers. And so getting that data, fed into the AI system so they can be programmed to respond how you want them to. That's number 4. And then the 5th one is the scary part, is the cybersecurity, and ensuring that your systems are compliant and secure against attacks by AI. So, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, is making sure that you're often doing assessments and understanding where your holes are in your security and protect against those, because the threats to your company are greater and greater each day as the hackers are using AI to get into your systems. So those are the 5 key areas: the culture, the infrastructure, the skills of your employees, the data that's involved, and then, of course, the security at the end.
And from your personal experience, how do you align, the digital side, the digital readiness, with your other business goals?
I don't know, what was a webinar or podcast we did a couple of months ago, that as a company, we use the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, and we quarterly set out goals as a company that we're working on. And sometimes all this feels really overwhelming. Like, when do I do this? When do I start implementing things? And there's so many things available. Like I mentioned, I just learned about a new tool, and it can be a little bit whiplash to your team if you're constantly saying, "Hey, I learned about this new tool yesterday from so and so. Let's do it." And they're like, "Well, you just talked about 5 other tools you want to do, and do you want us to do this one or these other ones first?" And so it's really developing a good roadmap as an organization of how you're going to implement these and not overwhelm your team too much. So as a leadership team, or if the leader is just you, look at what's available out there and say, this quarter we're going to implement this new tool, and make sure that we have, all the training that's available. Make sure that it's, becomes sticky inside the organization, or, and it's fully implemented and adopted across an organization. And it might be one quarter, it might be multiple quarters to get each one of these new tools implemented, depending on the scope that's involved. But the last thing you want to do as a leader is be like, I think the dog's name was Doug on the movie Up. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's one of my kids' favorite movies. This dog could talk, and he was talking to, the Boy Scout and the old man in the movie. And he was explaining things really well. And then is a squirrel, and he would look away and run off, and you just don't want to be the squirrel or the squirrel chaser. So certainly having a plan in place and developing, the timeline on when these things are happening, and ensure that that you're not putting new things over the top of initiatives that are really important to your organization too.
Yeah, I would think developing a plan with, kind of your end goal in mind would help you figure out which of these strategies you should implement first, or in order for them.
For sure.
Yeah. And so, for somebody getting started, like if they don't even know where to begin with what to put on their digital assessment, how do you think they should go about starting to do this?
Certainly use some tools. If you're it's a free account to set up with ChatGPT. You certainly can ask ChatGPT or one of the other generative AI tools and say, "Hey, I'm a CPA firm, and I'd like to implement some AI technologies in my firm. What should I do?" And just have it generate some ideas. It used to be that you Googled this, and Google is obviously with their search engine is incorporating some AI technologies in there. But there's people that are marketing to you, and a lot of the things that you get when you do these searches will be marketing materials too. So, using something like a generative AI to do some research for you is a good way to do it. But I think, pick one area of your business that you would really like to focus on. So I just mentioned sales and marketing. Maybe you want to incorporate some AI technologies in your sales process. So do some research and say, how do I incorporate AI into the sales process? And then go out to the marketplace, or have one of your team members go out to the market and see what tools that are available today out there that you can incorporate in the sales process. It might be, like I mentioned, the crystal nose, or it might be another tool that will help your sales team be more effective. And once you've aligned the tool with your goal, then you can create the scope and the implementation. But I think what happens is, a lot of times, you find a tool, and then you find a problem for that tool to fix, right? And I think it needs to be the other way around, and say, okay, I'm having this problem today. We're having an ineffective sales process. We're not closing as much as we used to. What can I implement today to fix this problem? So identify the issue first, and then find a solution for it, and hopefully there's some type of AI to help you with that. And then, use a guide to help you with this process, because it is overwhelming. You could talk to us at Stimulus, to talk about some tools out there, think about the problems that you're having. It's a good opportunity when we do a technology business review with you as an organization, talk to your technical account manager about problems that you're having, and then we can help guide the process on implementing some new tools or new technologies inside your organization to solve those business problems that you're having. So I always think it should start with a pain point or a business problem you're having, come up with what the results you would like it to be, and then find the tools or technology to solve those for you.
Yeah, and definitely, and it was a webinar, I think, for the EOS system, and we do have a lot of those resources available for people on all these technologies. So definitely, look for those, or reach out to us and ask. we'll be happy to help with that kind of thing. Any final thoughts on this topic?
It's a new generation. There's just so many interesting things that are out there for business owners to use to make their businesses better. And kind of going back to what we talked about in the beginning is, that bell curve, wherever you're at as an organization, as far as the standard goes, you as a leader sets where you want your organization to be. Do you want to be, the bleeding edge adopter? Do you want to be, one of the mass adopters, or do you want to be one of the laggards? And I would say if you're, if you want to wait to see what everybody else does first and the problems that they have, and then you think about implementing it, you're going to be left behind. And I think today it doesn't take very long. I mean, it could take 6 months or 12 months, where it might have taken years before for your competitors to really be beyond where you're at. So there are tools, there's things out there in all areas of your business, whether it's, customer service, sales and marketing, service deployment, technical work. There's so many tools out there that are honestly pretty inexpensive in their subscription models for the most part, to try out. And I think about where you're having problems inside your organization in all different areas, and then find a solution for it, and make sure that you're ready to really implement these technologies as far as your organization goes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Valuable information as always, Nathan.
All right. Thanks, Sherry. And thanks to everybody for being here today.